Ya, kelas.
emphasis needed to be placed was on grammar instruction.
Mhm.
So I am so excited that Candy asked me to come along on this journey with her this year. And I am so excited for you to join in with us as well.
Yeah, and actually we have our emails up there right now. So feel free to jot them down. Hopefully we can keep in touch. We'll put them up again at the end of the session, but hopefully you will be excited about maybe joining in on this little journey with us. All right, so here we go. Why did we decide to focus on this work with the sentence? Good question. And to kind of get us started, one of the things that I believe very strongly in is that especially our youngest writers, are super intimidated when it comes to getting their thoughts on the paper. It can certainly be scary to compose an entire piece of writing. And what Meredith and I have been talking about a lot lately is, if we could perhaps have more of an emphasis on crafting strong sentences and really stick to instructing more at the sentence level than perhaps we do right now, could we help students build not only their confidence, but their writing stamina?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I see that my students struggle with is when they are faced with that blank paper and they know that they need to have that finished piece. It can be very overwhelming just to put the pencil to the paper. And then a lot of times we start to see students think about quantity instead of quality. And we have students that write so many sentences because they're so focused on having that finished writing piece and having a lot on the paper. So we really think that just by taking that step back, focusing in on those individual sentences is really going to benefit all of our writers.
Absolutely. So this year, what we're hoping to do is sort of surround ourselves and the students with some really meaningful talk about that sentence work. And our goal for our time with all of you this morning is to kind of think about it in terms of, it's September, it's the beginning of the year, you still have the whole year ahead of you. And, how can we maybe give you some ideas for how you can set up your classrooms and provide kind of those spaces and places for you to do some of this work all year long?
And one of my favorite things when I go to PD is to find something that I can bring back the next time I'm in the classroom and try it. So we're really excited today to give you so many ideas of things you can start on Monday in your own classroom.
Absolutely. So we're gonna move along here to kind of something that we need to set the stage and have a little conversation first before we can move forward. One of the things in our school district that we do is that we assess students' writing through the lenses of the 6 traits. We love to do this because it definitely allows us to narrow in on a focus for what goals we need to set for our writers. But as a supervisor in the district, I get the opportunity to talk to so many teachers, and I would say that predominantly the conversation I have most times about students writing centers around organization, ideas, and word choice. Teachers always want to talk about, oh gosh, Candy, I'm having trouble getting the kids to organize their thoughts. Their writing's not making any sense. Sometimes that's obviously related to organization. Ideas is another big trait that comes up all the time for those kids who maybe aren't really adding much on the paper. And if they have details at all, they're not perhaps well developed. So teachers like to talk about that. And lastly, word choice. Sometimes it's not just about adding lots of details, but helping kids narrow in on their specific word choices. That comes up all the time as well. One of the things, though, that Meredith and I have been talking a lot about is that we have conventions highlighted here in red. And that definitely is something we touch on.
Oh, definitely. But we really tend to focus on capitalization, punctuation, and spelling.
Absolutely. And the problem with that is that underneath sort of that umbrella of conventions is also that kind of scary G word that we sometimes, hide from, which is grammar. And that's definitely where we're going to be putting a lot of the emphasis for our work this year. Because the way that I've been looking at this lately is that grammar is also directly related to that green highlighted trait there of sentence fluency, which I can promise you that is something very rarely I engage in conversation about with teachers when it comes to conferring with kids about their writing. I don't often hear teachers, saying, oh, I really want to sort of, teach into that particular trait with my students. And what we're starting to think about is how the grammar piece and the sentence fluency piece go hand in hand. Because again, sentence fluency is really very magical, and we need to pay more attention to it because it's all about the way that the words and phrases sound in a sentence but not just within a sentence, but how do those sentences sound when they're read one after the other? And if we can kind of figure this out, maybe, I don't know, we've got that voice things like out in the middle there. How do we feel about that?
So I feel like voice is what we all want our students to have, but it is definitely the hardest thing for us to teach.
Absolutely. We were joking around earlier. We were saying voice. It seems to be big. Kids like to talk about unicorns right now. So voice is almost like that unicorn magical trait that's kind of hard to, it's kind of hard to nail down exactly what's going on with that. So we're hoping for the best. But here's our kind of different approach that we're going to be taking this year. And it's not really all that different, but just reframing the way we're thinking about these traits. And if we are putting more of an emphasis on our sentence fluency work and our grammar work together, what we're hoping is that that emphasis will sort of kind of hug or influence how the students are doing in all of those other areas as well. So for example, when we think about organization, once we start to get to talk to the students about transitional phrases at the beginning of sentences, obviously that will have a positive impact on the students' organization in their writing. Thinking about ideas, obviously parts of speech work is something that we're going to be doing a lot of this year. And what we're hoping is that when we look at the parts of the sentences more closely, it will help students to actually build and develop more ideas in their writing. And then the one thing we want to be careful about is that what we don't want is for students to think that long sentences are always better sentences, that sometimes we need to zoom in and zero in on those sentences and also think really hard about our word choice as well. So again, all of these things, hopefully, if we're doing this all together, then it will have an impact on the student's voice as well.
Yes. We're hoping to get to the heart of their writing, their voice, and I really think that this is a great way that this can become more direct instruction with their voice.
So again, right now that we've kind of talked about those different traits, this might be a good time to kind of stop and pause and maybe think for yourself a little bit about when you work with your student writers, what are the traits that kind of, seem to pop out the most for you? What are the areas here where you seem to do your most work with students? So whether you're tweeting or whether you're popping something into the chat, go ahead and do that, and we'll give you a couple minutes and then we'll move on. Not really a couple minutes. We don't have that much time.
Just a few seconds.
So we're gonna probably keep moving on anyway as you share that with us. But again, as we move along, then just to kind of ground our work together today, one of the things we wanted to remind everybody is that what is our question that we're trying to answer? What are we talking about today? And that is whether we could make maybe a more concerted effort and have more consistent emphasis on this connection between sentence fluency and conventions, particularly grammar. Will this help to improve our students' writing? And when we talk about grammar, I mean, again, it's embedded under that umbrella of conventions. And as Meredith and I were just talking about, we know, as Meredith said, we focus on the spelling, the punctuation, and the capitalization. But again, grammar is a part of conventions, and it's definitely something, as Jeff Anderson always reminds us, that these are the things readers are expecting a courteous writer to do. And we thought that was kind of something that we wanted to keep in mind as we were moving forward with this work.
Yeah, we definitely, like Candy said, spelling, punctuation, capitalization, very important. We don't want to stop with that instruction because, especially for our early writers, it is so important. But just as much emphasis needs to be placed on grammar instruction.
Absolutely. All right. So one of my favorite quotes ever is this quote by Constance Weaver, and that's that teaching grammar divorced, keeping it separate from writing, doesn't strengthen writing, and actually even could waste time. So one of the things we wanted to talk about a little bit right now is what our current practice is in our district with regards to teaching grammar.
So the way that we're currently teaching grammar is through a skills practice book. What's great about a program like that is you're hitting every standard if you're doing those pages because everything corresponds to what we need to teach our students. But unfortunately, there are a few areas where it's maybe not the best way that we could be teaching grammar. I know especially in the early grades, A lot of our students are emerging readers. So that skills practice book, the sentences, can be a lot for our students to read at the beginning of the year. So we end up not being able to access it until a little bit later. And just think about all that great time that could have been spent on grammar instruction that we're missing out on. Another thing I notice is that for my students, a lot of them can independently complete those skills practice pages and get everything correct. And when it's time for them to use those skills in their writing, they're either not or they're using them incorrectly. So since it's so isolated, that translation into their writing, that application piece is missing.
And it's funny, we were talking about the fact that, yes, even in these sort of workbook pages, there is definitely a correlation between the activities and our standards. But one of the important